Hello, and welcome to this masterclass, Protecting Your Project, Why You Need to Get Your Insurance Right. My name is Simon Middleton. I'm Managing Director of Protek Group Limited, and today I'm going to go over some of the things you need to consider with regard to arranging insurance and structure warranties on your project, and perhaps more importantly, why you need to do so. Okay, so if you have a look at this this slide here, you've got a photograph showing a pile of timber that's clearly been flattened to the ground, and this is the result of a windstorm claim. So I thought it'd be a good opener, really, just to sort of give you an idea of what site insurance actually covers. Destroyed in a windstorm. The claim was £90,000 once it was all the debris was removed, the frame was reconstructed and put back up again. But the premium was around about £500, so it's a pretty good investment. I hope you'll agree with that. But the point is, without insurance, this loss for the couple that built this house would have been pretty catastrophic. So that's the point. Insurance is a risk management tool, and that's what we're going to go through. Okay, so different sort of projects fall under site insurance. We've got renovation, new build, conversion, extension. All these projects can be covered by site insurance, but the important factor to bear in mind is that the renovation, extension, and the conversion projects include, and the extension, an element of existing structure. So that's the existing house, existing barn, and lots of people just fall into a trap of, well, if I've got an existing structure, it's my home, this will be covered under home insurance. And that's absolutely not the case. You can call your home insurer and they may turn around and say, well, that's fine, we can cover your extension. But they're only ever going to cover you for fire, lightning, aircraft explosion, malicious damage and vandalism, not for my house has collapsed because I've put a new opening in and it's collapsed, or I have now damaged my neighbour's property, or I've had theft of my materials, or my plant tools and equipment's been stolen, or somebody has been injured whilst working on the site. And that's why site insurance is so critically important. So the point here is you need to speak to somebody that understands what it is that you're doing and the sort of coverage that you need, which is you're not normally going to find that from a traditional broker, or indeed a high street insurance provider, or your bank or building society. Okay, so let's have a little look at what sort of things can occur, what can go wrong on a construction site. You can see here we've got a gable end that's it's been blown down in a storm, so the blockwork has come down. And then in the picture below, you can actually see the beam and block floor that's been damaged, where the blockwork has fallen from height. But what's not particularly apparent in that photograph is that the damage is fairly extensive, and it is the beams have actually levered the internal structural leaf of the entire building upwards. So the whole thing had to be taken down and completely rebuilt. Covered by site insurance, which is pretty straightforward. In the photograph on the right, you can see that we've got a window that's been damaged. Thieves could see cardboard boxes full of materials inside the house through the windows, so they tried with a crowbar most of the windows on the ground floor and damaged all of them. They did manage to get in, but they didn't steal anything because in fact the cardboard boxes were empty. And that's something you need to bear in mind. If it's tempting, if they can see something and it's got some writing on the outside, which means it's a boiler or something that they would like to pinch, then they'll do so. Obviously, replacement windows, the rendering had to be repaired. It was a fairly expensive claim. We talk about underinsurance a lot in the insurance industry. It's something that you need to be aware of. If you build your house for £100,000, there's an element of your project management time, maybe your own labour in that build cost. If you get to the end of the build 2 days before you move in and it is destroyed by fire or a serious loss like this storm damage occurs, you do not necessarily want to have to do it all again yourself. So if you insure for professional reinstatement costs, which will be higher, it'll be the cost of a main contractor coming in to do the work quickly, then your insurance claim would be settled on that basis, which can make a lot of difference in terms of the time. Okay, so what needs to be covered during the build? You can see on this slide we've got 4 vertical silos: new build, conversion, renovation, extension. They're the project types, and site insurance sits across all of those. It covers the new works, temporary works, materials, plants, tools and equipment, caravan, contents, personal possessions, public liability and employer's liability. And in terms of the conversion, renovation, and extension, the only addition is it will also cover the existing structure. So those two things added together, the new works and the existing structure, cover the entire build if it was destroyed 2 days before you moved in. If someone wanders onto your site and injures themselves, it will invariably be your responsibility, even if they were trespassing, so that's public liability. Professional reinstatement costs, as I've just alluded to, is the only way to really arrange insurance on a project. And in terms of hired plant, tools and equipment, you may think, well, I'm not hiring anything, my contractor's hiring it. That's absolutely fine. Just make sure you don't sign the hire agreement tickets when they're delivered to site, because the person that's signed them is the person that's deemed to be the hirer. Now, these policies come in sort of durations ranging from 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12, 18, 2 years sometimes. It's important to get a policy that will cover you for the duration of your build. You might think you're going to build it in 9 months, but the reality is it'll probably be 12 months. It's cheaper to take a 12-month policy than it is to take a 9 and then extend. So just bear that in mind. Okay, in terms of other areas that you need some cover, I'll just pick up on a point there. Arrange insurance from the time of exchange on the building plot or the building, because of that exposure to trespass, you are going to be responsible from the time of exchange of contracts. Okay, next slide. What else do you need to consider? Well, legal expenses. Legal expenses cover contractual disputes, and eviction of squatters. But if you are in dispute with your architect or your main contractor, the supplier of a frame, for example, if you've got legal expenses in place and a written contract, then the legal expenses will help you get some legal assistance if you need to fight your case for some reason. It works on the prospect of success. So if you've got absolutely zero prospect of success, they will not actually fight your corner in the first place. But it's a useful tool to have only if you've got written contracts. I'll talk a bit more about those later. Other things you might need to consider is the Party Wall Act, or common law as it is in Scotland. And in these diagrams, you can see that we're building within 3 meters of an adjoining property, or there's also a 6-meter rule if you're undermining a foundation at a much lower level at 45 degrees. A retaining wall need not just be the wall of a neighbouring property. It could be a boundary wall, it could be a garage, it could be the party wall between you and your semi-detached property. So it affects basements, loft conversions. You could be putting a steel into the wall, for example. And ultimately, any damage you do to your neighbouring property will be down to you. Now, ordinary site insurance won't cover that liability because it's not what we would class as negligence. If you are building your foundations alongside your neighbour's property, it's quite likely that you are going to be undermining them while putting yours in. And for that reason, it's not going to be a sort of an unforeseen event. So it's a difference between site insurance and actually covering the liability, the contractual liability that you will incur under a party wall agreement. So it's really, really important that you tell your insurance provider if you've got 1 or more party wall agreements, you need to get the adjoining property surveyed so you can prove what condition it was in, and that will then help you get the insurance in place and get it all sorted out. So telling them is absolutely crucial. So now we're going to talk a little bit about structure warranty, because structure warranties cover defective design, workmanship and materials. And the purpose of this slide is to show you some of the defects that we see on a fairly regular basis. And you can see that we've got a level being held up against a SIP panel system. The whole system's gone up out of plumb. That causes structural problems, movement, ultimately leading to defective weatherproofing. And those are the sort of things that have been checked by the auditors on site during the course of providing you with a structural warranty. Top right hand corner, we've got a soft spot on a foundation. Had this not been picked up by the surveyor, the contractor may have just carried on, put the concrete in the foundations, and we'd have ended up with perhaps a structural failure, which would have required underpinning of some description, which would have been covered by the warranty. So it just highlights those sort of areas. Below that, we have a steel column that's been set probably in the right place, but the foundations have not. So that's going to cause problems. To the left, we've got a damp-proof membrane, which is just poorly lapped to the DPC. That'll lead to damp. And we've got partial fill cavity in a full fill cavity situation, which will lead to dampness into the interior property. So the point here is, could you recognise something that is being built badly? You know, could you spot the right application or use of a product or material? And that's what structural warranty does. It's not only does it give you a 10-year cover at the point of completion of the property, but it's actually checking it during the course of construction to make sure it's going up the way you really want it to. We've got a few more photos here. This is a property that came to us retrospectively. So it was finished, and then the customer needed a warranty. And these are just some of the items that we established along the way. Just to tell you it was a disaster is a slight understatement, but the point is the customer felt that they had a reasonable home just with a little bit of settlement and snagging, but actually it turned out to be fairly major in the scheme of things. Without a structural warranty in place, these issues will become your issues, and that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Okay, so what does a structural warranty cover? Well, again, it can go across new build, conversion, renovation, extension. It covers the new works and consequential damage to the existing elements. Covers defects in design, workmanship, materials, and components utilised in the project if they subsequently cause major damage, defective weatherproofing, if they've got defective chimneys and flues, drainage, health and safety of occupants, and contaminated land. So if you're working on a site where the contamination has to be remediated and the remediation subsequently fails, that's what's covered under a structural warranty. In order to get one, it is provided on the back of a technical audit process, so we're inspecting during the course of construction, and that can be combined with building control via a partnered surveyor as well. You need to be aware that a structural warranty is not the same thing as an architect certificate or professional consultant certificate. It's much more comprehensive than that tool. Professional consultant certificates rely on an extension of the architect's professional indemnity cover. You will need to prove that the architect or professional was negligent in order to make a claim against it. If the architect's no longer in business, you haven't got a hope of doing that. Lenders are moving away from architect certificates and professional consultant certificates for that reason. So please bear that in mind. You need to arrange it pretty early on, because once the first inspection goes out, they're going to want to look at the foundations. If you miss that, if you've moved on and you're halfway through the build and realise you need a warranty, you can still get one. It's just more expensive because the insurer is loading for what they've not been able to see. So bear that in mind. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just go through a few things that come up on a fairly regular basis. It's a bit like a frequently asked question, but it gives you a good idea of the sort of things that you need to know. Plant, tools and equipment. So if you sign a hire agreement, then you've assumed responsibility for that particular item of plant. So if your contractor has hired it, then they should be paying for it and they should be signing for it. When you finish with an item of plant, make sure it's off-hired. Ring them off-hire, because at that point it is not your responsibility. Site insurance policies cover continuing hire charges. So if the item of plant is stolen, you will be responsible for paying for the hire until it's actually been replaced. So that's covered under a site insurance policy. Also, if you've got an item of plant stranded on your site through mechanical failure or otherwise, perhaps you've got it stuck in some mud somewhere, then that can be covered under the warranty, under the site insurance too. Health and safety is something that we should all be very, very keen on. If you are exercising management control on the site, then you have a responsibility for health and safety. It's as simple as that. You need to do a risk assessment on your site. You need to think about a health and safety policy. Lots of help on the HSE website. You really should be aware of what you need to do. It's simple things like, have I got people working at height where I've got people working below? if a brick comes off a scaffold, hits somebody on the head, it's a disaster you don't want to think about. But also tidy sites. Injuries happen fairly frequently. Somebody coming down a ladder, for example, they get to the bottom of the ladder, they step off onto a loose brick, maybe some wood's hanging around somewhere, twist their ankles, break their ankles, for example, that turns into a public liability claim against you. So it's important to understand where you stand with health and safety. Indemnity is an important insurance term. It is not new for old. Site insurance policies and the like do not work on a new for old basis. If you have a 10-year-old JCB on your site and it is stolen, then the insurer would look to replace it or give you a cash settlement for a 10-year-old JCB. So the same thing for materials, for example. If you've got new materials and you've kept the receipts, then you can prove to the insurer that you are looking for a new replacement because it's only a week old. So it's really important that you keep receipts for absolutely everything. Tips to avoid theft from site. Unfortunately, theft is fairly prevalent on self-built building sites. If you're going to have a container to put all your materials or your plant, your tools in, that's great. It's good. Secure it, but make sure it's concreted into the ground. Put some rebar around the latching points so they can't actually be picked up, because if it's too close to a road, someone will come along with a high-ab truck and they will literally just pick up the entire container and take the lot. If you're having stuff delivered, make sure you've kept a note of who's delivered it. Get some ID from them so you know who they are. It's all very well them getting your name and signing the little box, but find out who they are, write it down. They now know that you know who they are, and they're less likely to tip somebody off. Quite often inadvertently, they'll just say, oh, I delivered a lovely new kitchen to that place at, down the road there. That's all it takes. Stuff is miraculously nicked very shortly after being delivered. So bear that in mind. Keep stuff out of sight. As I've said in a slide previously, you know, thieves will break in for an empty cardboard box. So don't put a cardboard box the other side of a window, because they'll go through your folding sliding doors and they'll make a real mess. What to do if you suffer a loss? You need to act as if you're uninsured, basically. If you've got water pouring in, get a pump. If you need a dehumidifier, fine, hire it. Keep photographs of all the damage. Any additional costs you incur in minimizing the overall loss will be recoverable as part and parcel of the claim. You need to make the claim very quickly. Don't wait to the end of the build and then ring the insurer and say, I had 6 instances during the whole 12 months where we had some stuff stolen, because the insurer will turn around to you and say, you didn't advise us at the time of the claim, so we're not going to deal with it. Bear that in mind. Read your policy and understand what your requirements are. Contracts, mentioned these earlier. Use written contracts. You can get a contract pack from contractstore.com. I think they're about £50. They're really straightforward. I've used them on my projects. It's a template. If you add in the full specification, it's a great way of getting exactly what you expect it to get at exactly the price that's been quoted by that particular contractor. It means then that you can use legal expenses if things go wrong. If you haven't got a contract, don't waste money on legal expenses because you haven't got a contract. It's as simple as that. My home insurer said they would cover my extension. Great. They'll only cover it for fire lining, aircraft explosion, malicious damage and vandalism, not for what you really need. So don't get caught on that one. Friends helping on site, you need to make sure they're actually covered under the employer's liability section, even if you're not paying them. If they're injured on site, you will want to help them, especially if they're, you know, really seriously injured. So it's important they're covered. And this final one, if I had £1 for every time somebody said this, if you are having a contractor build the whole house for you from start to finish, and they have contractors all risks policy, the policy limit is big enough to cover the cost of rebuilding your entire house from start to finish, that's fine, you can rely on it if you've got it in the contract. If they're just doing a certain element of the structure, for example, they're building you a shell and moving away, you will need site insurance. No one is going to be covering it while they're off site, so bear that in mind. Okay, that's enough from me. Are there any questions? I'm happy to take them now. Thank you.